Poonam is a multidisciplinary professional with experience across academia, corporate, nonprofit, and government sectors. A TEDx speaker and author, she blends expertise in economics, public policy, and data analytics with a passion for self growth, DEI, and agile leadership, bringing a unique people centered perspective to every space she enters. So, Poonam, thank you so much for spending the time with us today. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and hide myself from the screen and let you take over.
Great. Thank you, Louise, so much for that beautiful introduction. Hello, all of y'all down. I see on the little screen. Hello, everyone. Like Louise said, my name is Poonum Desai, and I'm delighted to be here today to speak with you all about building psychological safety internally. And as my mom has so kindly pointed out herself in the chat, hi, Mom. Thanks for the support. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll dive right on in. And if you just bear with me a moment, we'll get started. Okay, so can everyone see this? I just want to make sure that they can all see the screen and there's no message to avoid an infinity mirror. Excellent. Okay, so let me just make sure I've got this. Okay, great. All right. So today, like I said, I'm going to be speaking about building internal psychological safety. And the reason that I want to approach it from this perspective is for a few reasons. And as we dive right into the presentation, I'll get more in depth. But the main thing is truly when it comes to building psychological safety, it is important to look at what does safety look like for ourselves. And especially as we transition from maybe being junior folks or whatnot, and we move into middle management or any sort of management positions, knowing what our internal psychologically safe environment looks like is the difference between being that manager and then really taking that step forward to becoming a leader. Because as we all know, a manager is not always a leader and a leader is not always a manager. And so when we're building our internal psychological safety, there is this aspect of accountability to ensure that we know what we need to do for ourselves to bring our best foot forward. And oftentimes I hear from managers, it's always, well, I need to be better. I have to do this, or there's more that I'm not doing right, or I need to change this, or I need to do that. And the truth is, I ask them to take a step back and say, well, what do you want for yourself? What do you believe you deserve for yourself? And if we start changing the dialogue about I have to do all these things and more of I deserve to know what looks psychologically safe looks like for me. I deserve to know what I need in order to build a better environment for myself. That change in mindset allows us to change how we present ourselves to the world. And then also that trickles out into our team. When we lead by that example, our team tends to follow. And so as we move out throughout this presentation, I would invite you to really keep this in the perspective of I deserve to build this for myself. And so as we go through what safety can is by definition, what it looks like, what are the pillars of it, encouraging you to say, you know what, I want to address this for myself. So the next thing that I'd like to really emphasize as we go through this, as I know it's building it internally, and a lot of the literature we see talks a lot about what can the organization do to build psychological safety. And I absolutely think that that is important and relevant. But there is also, I think, a mutual benefit relationship here. Knowing what psychological safety looks like for you helps the organization. And what the organization can do and what's within their control helps you. And so when we look at what is your responsibility or what is within your control, knowing what safety looks like for you is the key to thriving. And this is for three main reasons. The first one is safety is a human need, but we have this misconception that as long as we have physical safety, then beyond that, safety looks the same for everybody, right? If you have a roof over your head, then everyone's considered safe. And then safety is taken care of from that physical, and it's limited to that physical coverage. But when we go to work, and especially if we're working at our desk jobs, which a lot of us who are in these environments are, our brain is what is really needing that protection, right? We kind of are, we have the protection, and that's kind of a given. So when our labor, which is our brain power, our intellect, our perception, our skills, that is what really needs that protection. And that is also within our responsibility to control. How can we protect it? How can we empower it? And how can we build it better for our brain protection, if you will. The second thing is that safety looks different for everybody. And this is why sometimes there can be an organization that is perfect on paper, but it just does not jive with you. There's just something about it where you're like, I just don't feel that I belong here, that I can be my best here. And so that is because safety looks different for everybody. And what someone may need in this environment to feel safe is different than what someone else might need. And that is also within your responsibility to know and build for yourself. That way, no matter what's going on within the organization, you know how safe you can feel and maybe actions you might need to take if you're not feeling super duper safe or something could be improved. And then the third reason is that safety has a spectrum. We're going to go into the four pillars of safety in a couple of minutes here, but safety has a spectrum, and you can have safety in some areas, some safety in not other areas, or you can have safety in all of them, but at different levels. And so for those three main reasons, that's why knowing what safety looks like for you and you're responsible for building that for yourself allows you to bring your best foot forward because you know what you need, how you can build it, and how you can adjust as needed. Now, again, we're going to focus more on internal psychological safety, but I want to point out that the organization, their responsibility, I believe, has more impact instead of just building psychological safety and saying, we want to build psychological safety, we want to build psychological safety. They have more impact by addressing the quality of the safety behaviors they nurture from top leadership down through their ripple effect. And we'll again go into this a little bit later, but the actions that from higher leadership that they exude, that they exemplify, and then if that gets nurtured and that becomes a standard, that's the ripple effect. So then middle management will act like that. They'll teach their junior folks to act like that. And so when we're talking about on an organizational level, building psychologically safe environments, it's more effective to first address the impact of the quality of safety behaviors they nurture. And that leads to the symbiotic relationship. If I know what safety looks like for me, and I know how the organization is going to nurture that, then I can adjust as needed. And then that helps the organization also meet whatever psychological safe goals that they have. And so, again, as we move on, we're going to focus on internal, but I would like to also point out that it is more of a symbiotic relationship. And it's not an organization's responsibility solely, and it's not your responsibility solely. It's about focusing on what you can control and seeing how that plays out to what the organization will nurture. And the biggest reason for this is a lot of times, and this happens so commonly in the workplace, someone will say, I'm in such a toxic environment, or I just really don't like things at work right now. And so a lot of the advice someone might get is, oh, well, just move, switch teams, find a different manager, just get a different job. But the truth is, that's not always the realistic possibility, right? We can't, it takes time to find a new job. And who's to say that when you go to the new job, it won't be the same situation, right? Or you might not have the option of changing managers or moving laterally. And so it's important to find what allows you to stay grounded no matter what's going on in the organization. And then looking at the organization from a long-term perspective to see, is this where I'm going to be able to be my best self? So that being said, if we look at psychological safety, what is it? I've talked a lot about building safety, whatnot, but what is it? And it's, if you look it up, the definition is the belief that one will not be punished for speaking up with ideas, questions, or making mistakes. And a psychologically safe environment is one in which everyone can speak and act without fear, regardless of title. And so on an organizational level, if that's the definition, everyone immediately would think, boy, that would be lovely if our organization could encourage that, right? But that's not always the case, or sometimes that's not always within your control. And so that is all the more emphasis about what allows me to feel safe and what allows me to, do I like the behavior I'm exuding to feel safe? And we'll get a little bit more into the specifics, but the question here that I always ask professionals to consider is not so much, am I building safety from the ground up? It's more of, what is the quality of behaviors I'm engaging in to feel safe? Because safety is a human need. We are always chasing safety, and we will always do whatever we need to feel safe. That's a human need. And so the question is not, am I building safety from the ground up, or is this a new um, I guess, new thing that I want to create for myself. The question really is, what am I currently doing to build safety for myself? And do I like what I'm doing that's allowing me to build safety? And are there higher quality forms that I could chase to make me feel more authentic to myself? And so when we go into the nitty gritty of psychological safety, if you look at a lot of the literature, when it comes to an organizational view, these are actually four stages. They go in a linear fashion, and from an organizational standpoint, it goes inclusion safety, learner safety, contributor safety, challenger safety, and they move in this linear fashion. And again, on an organizational level, that makes sense. If you're building a company, there are lots of different factors you have to consider. And if you move through these stages, then you can reap the benefits of a more psychologically inclusive space on a whole level. But I've come to find that when it comes to building internal psychological safety, it's not so much that these are four stages, but rather four pillars. And each pillar upholds this overarching umbrella of psychological safety, internal psychological safety. And I said a little bit earlier that safety comes in different spectrums and different, bandwidth. And that is where these four pillars come into play. Because realistically, you might have all four of these pillars, but maybe not to, but in different extents. Or you might have one, but in that moment, that's enough to satiate you at your job and allow you to feel and give yourself that empowerment or that satisfaction that you need from your work. And so, while it comes to, in this case, it's not for, it's not in particular order, but I'm going to go in the normal order. It would be the first stage or pillar, excuse me, is inclusion. And this pillar is, how safe do I feel to show up authentically to work? And the key words that we're looking here for are authenticity, inclusivity, identity. And so, like I mentioned earlier, we're always trying to build safety. And so when it comes to inclusion safety, the question is, what behaviors do I engage in to feel included? And so a boys club, for example, is a form of inclusion safety. So people, if they want to feel included and safe because we want to feel part of a community, we may act in a way that allows us to be part of the boys club. But for some of us who have to do that, or if you have to fit in a certain way, if you have to fit in a certain type, that may feel inauthentic to who you are as a person. And eventually that contributes to burnout, because when we behave in a way that is so inauthentic to our moral code, or our value system, it begins to wear on us. And so going back to that main question of, is this a low quality behavior for me or a high quality behavior of me? The question really is, what am I doing to feel included? And do I like what I have to do to feel included? The second pillar, is learner safety. How safe do I feel to make and learn from mistakes? If you're in it, if you feel that I cannot make mistakes and I have to feel perfect, that is going to really struggle eventually over time, right? Because mistakes are going to happen, period. The question is, do I feel safe enough to make mistakes and learn from them? Or am I so busy trying to avoid mistakes that when I make one, my whole self-worth comes crashing down? And so the key words with learner safety is accessibility, transparency, and teaching, ensuring that we feel safe to learn at our pace in a method that makes sense to us, that we can actually understand the material, so on and so forth. The third pillar is contributor safety. And this pillar is really important for job satisfaction and job fulfillment. And it's, how safe do I feel that I can work with trust and autonomy? And this is really the ownership aspect of our roles. As we move through learner safety and we build confidence that we know what we're doing, how safe do I feel that I can do what I got to do without being, that I have the trust to do that, right? And if we sometimes, if we don't feel safe, that leads to micromanaging. So that is an important pillar to understand within ourselves. What gives me the confidence to know that I'm trusted to do my best work? And then the last one is challenger safety. And this is a really, really important pillar in general, because when it comes to determining the quality of relationships we have and the quality of appreciation and value we have, challenger safety allows us to know whether someone is going to take maybe an uncomfortable conversation and how they'll react to that. Because when we challenge someone, right, that's in general uncomfortable. If we have to give constructive feedback, if we have to push back on something that we don't agree with, All that can lead to these feelings of uncomfort. But if someone feels confident enough and appreciated enough to come to you, or you can go to them and say, listen, we got to talk about this, and then have that uncomfortable conversation, that's actually a really, really big win. And that is a really spectacular indicator of how psychologically safe do I feel around this person, and how this person feels around me, to where we can have that uncomfortable conversation and keep it as a conversation, not as a personal attack, not as a, oh, I've done something wrong, but as this openness of, we're going to help each other become better. And so now that we've gone through these four pillars, again, it's really, I would invite you to consider, okay, how do I fit in these, and where do these fit into my role? I'll give you an example. I once worked at a firm where I really did not have any of these other three pillars other than contributor safety. That was the only pillar I really had for myself. But in that moment, where I was in my role, where I was in my life, having that trust to do what I needed to do, because they left me alone. I had no resources. I had to learn in a really fast with minimal resources. I didn't really feel included, but they left me alone and they allowed me to do what I needed to do. That was enough to sustain me in that role for that period of time. And that allowed me to keep my grounding of, despite not having inclusion, despite not having learner, despite not having challenger, that contributor safety was enough to keep me in that role. And that kind of ties back to that whole point of, safety looks different for everybody. Someone might hear me say that and say, absolutely not. I would be out of there. No, thank you. But it's different for everybody, which is, again, all the more reason why knowing what that internal safety looks like for you and what behaviors you're engaging in allows you to move forward. Thank you, Toddy. So moving on. I hope I pronounced that right, by the way. Oh, sorry. Press the button on the wrong one. So, psychological safety, why does it matter? And like I mentioned before, it is because knowing what our boundaries are and what we need to feel fulfilled in the workplace helps us navigate our life professionally and strategically. If it's kind of been a position where you like, I don't feel safe anywhere, you may not know that that feeling of unsafety, you might be perceiving that as, I just don't feel like I belong here. I just don't feel like I can thrive here. I just don't feel like I'm appreciated here. All of those feelings are, I don't feel safe here. But again, it's really important to know that internal safety, because that's not a guarantee at any role that you go to. It's something that has to be built within. And the reason it matters so much to be built within is, if we are constantly chasing external sources of safety, we rely on those external sources to not only provide the safety, but provide the validation that we are safe. So it's kind of like we're giving the reins to somebody else to run our life. And that's never going to work. And so building that internal safety allows you to stay grounded no matter where you go. That's not to say you shouldn't leave the job. That's not to say you shouldn't try to find a different manager, but that's to say that your safety is not dependent on somebody else, and you're not seeking that external source. You're knowing where it comes from internally, and it allows that internal fulfillment. And a lot of times when we don't have that internal fulfillment, we have that sticky feeling. It's just, you can't quite pinpoint it, but it's just, the best way to describe it is sticky. Your heart feels like it's dropping all the time. There's always some pit in your stomach, but you don't know what that pit is. It just feels sticky. And that's a great indicator of saying, you know what? We've been operating with low quality forms of safety, of building that safety. Because like I mentioned, we're always chasing that, but we don't realize that the forms of which we're using to chase safety are low quality. And it becomes a reactionary event, right? How many times have you been at work where you have a bad feeling, or you're like, this is leading to too many health issues, or I'm having relationship problems from this, or I just have no motivation to do anything. I show up to work and then I'm just done, out for the rest of the day. That's a reaction to low quality forms of safety. And then we realize something has to change. So we think we got to change our job. We got to do this. We got to do that. When internally it's, we don't know what safety looks like for us. And again, we keep chasing it. And then it still doesn't work. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. So this is how we break that cycle. And a few more examples of how we know something needs to change. A lot of us talk about burnout. And burnout is that primary, if not one of the biggest overarching umbrella effect or issues that comes from operating in these low quality forms of safety. After work, maybe you need to sleep. It's like all I do is work and sleep because I got no energy, or you just don't do things with as much enthusiasm as you used to, or you're just tired all the time, right? That burnout, and it comes faster and it lasts longer. Maybe a couple of years ago, you only needed one mental health day to recover from maybe an intense project. And now it feels you need weeks and you're barely recovered. So that means that there's consistent low quality form of safety mechanisms that we're using are just not working. Conflict and tension amongst the team are common. Maybe there's just low morale. You maybe are experiencing health and relationship issues, which is something we see a lot, especially as we move further in our career. If we keep operating on these habitual low quality form safety, they begin to show up in our health and relationship. And now we have to react instead of be proactive. A lot of folks we see are job hopping to escape, not to grow. There's nothing wrong with job hopping. I want to be very clear with that. But if you job hop because this job is just not it for me, then you go to another one and 6 months later, it's this job is not for me. And then you go to another one and 6 months later, this job's not for me. Then it's worth taking a look at, okay, maybe I just don't know how to feel safe no matter the environment around me. And the ultimate one that I think is very underrated is you just don't like who you are at work. We all have a work personality and we all show up and work a certain way. But if there is a point where you leave the work and you're like, this just feels so inauthentic to who I am, I don't like who I am, I just don't recognize this person, then it's time to evaluate what behaviors am I engaging that is just not allowing me to feel safe, and in analysis with my moral code or value code, if you will. So how do we start making the change? The first step before we go into all of this is to look at yourself with empathy, and not this is a check-to-do list, like I have to change. Otherwise, I'm not going to, I'm not going to be better. I need to fix myself. This is a beautiful thing that you get to explore for yourself, and that you owe yourself, and that you deserve for yourself. And changing that mentality right off the bat is going to allow you to explore yourself with curiosity instead of judgment. And without that curiosity, everything just feels like a chore, and it's not going to be sustainable. So as we move through this, the first thing that I'd always implore professionals to remember is safety is a human need. So if you feel shame around maybe actions that you've done or behaviors that you engage in that you don't like, but you don't know why you do it, it's because you are chasing safety. It's because safety is a human need. And so the question is not, how do we build psychological safety? The question really is, what is the quality of behavior we are engaging in to feel safe? And that's where the analysis really needs to happen, is are these low quality forms of safety or higher quality forms of safety, which we'll get into in a little bit. The second thing I'd like you to look at with yourself is mindset. How do you speak to yourself? Because if you speak to yourself with a bully mindset, you're going to speak to others with a bully mindset. And the same goes for empathy. And we're going to go into a little bit in the next slide about limiting mindsets in general, because I'm a firm believer that you can change your behavior. You can say, you know what, I'm going to change all these behaviors. But if you don't know why you're engaging in that and what mindsets are fueling these low quality behaviors, any behavior change you make will feel incomplete because you don't know the source. And so addressing the source first allows the behavior change to come a lot smoother and quicker. And so if you recognize that some of these limiting mindsets you're operating from come from a place of fear, then you're always going to be operating in that place of fear, and that trickles out into your team as well. So it comes in the form of, we got to prove that we can do it, when everyone knows we can do it. But if you got to prove it, that projection goes onto your team. Or if it's, we're all scared that we're not going to keep our jobs, so we have to keep working, that trickles out into our team too. So everyone's just in this fear environment. And again, we can't control the organization, but we can control ourselves and our team to some extent. And so as we engage in these higher quality mindset that come from empathy instead of fear, then that changes our behaviors to behave in from empathy instead of fear, which goes into the next thing is behaviors. Is you can only control the actions and behaviors you engage in to feel safe or when you feel unsafe. So the more you attempt to control your external circumstances or parties to fulfill your safety needs, the less internally safe you will feel. And so, and we've all been guilty of this. We've all done this in some way, shape, or form where we are really worried about something. So we're consistently trying to control our external environments. We see that with our kids, we see that with our partners, right? We're nervous about that something being safe or being upheaved. And so we're trying to control more externally, but that's just not going to allow us to feel safe, right? And it doesn't allow us to move with flexibility and bring the best version of ourselves. So if you're seeking to control these external environments, you will constantly be chasing external validation instead of internal fulfillment. And that is the difference between higher quality safety and lower quality safety behaviors. So let's move on to, like I said, we need to address some limiting mindsets first. And let's go into the 4 common ones that I see in any work environment, corporate, whatnot. But these are the 4 common ones. And they are the self-sacrifice fire, the baggage-free illusion, the neutral Janet desire, and the us versus them dilemma. And so the self-sacrifice fire, I think a lot of women can immediately, identify with without even completely knowing what it is, because as women, especially, we tend to think we need to be the superwoman. We got to do it all, and we got to do it for everybody else. And we need to make sure everybody else is taken care of and that they're okay, even if it comes at the expense of us. And so the self-sacrifice fire, I labeled it from this quote: you don't need to set yourself on fire to keep others warm, right? But a lot of us do, maybe intentionally, unintentionally, but we tend to we will make sure that everybody else is taken care of first. And then when we have nothing left to give, we still give from this empty bank account, if you will. And why this is a limiting mindset and hinders our ability to build higher quality forms of psychological safety is because we're constantly perceiving that our worth is correlated to what we can do for others, and our inherent value is what we can do for others. And so if we're not constantly giving and constantly ensuring that we're seen as reliable and we can do it all, and versus all those excellent things, we keep putting ourselves on the back burner, and that gives us this feedback loop that everyone else is more important, we are not. And so this leads to that extreme high burnout and that high turnover, because at some point your body is going to say, we cannot do this anymore. We literally have nothing left to give. And so then now we have to pick ourselves up from kind of a negative account balance, like I said. And so it's worth considering, how do you correlate your value and your productivity? If you think that your value is equal to your productivity, then this leads to these unsafe behaviors, again, that we commonly see, such as overworking or saying yes when we really, we mean no, like we don't have the bandwidth for it, but we say, you know what, we can do it. We can somehow increase this capacity that we don't have. And so that is why that self-sacrifice fire can be a limiting mindset into what we do to feel safe. The next one is the baggage-free illusion. And this comes from that quote. When I used to work in retail, I had a boss who would always say, leave your luggage at the door. And he meant that in a way of saying, show up well, show up happy, make sure that you're doing the best for our customers, which is a valid point. But in general, we think that everything that has molded us, our experiences, our perceptions, how we grew up, what we grew up with, etc., we all think that when we show up to work, that stays at the door and it doesn't come with us. And that is not true. It does come with us, but it comes with us, instead of being a part of who we are, it's a shameful part of who we are. So an example that I often see is people pleasing. People will think, oh, well, I'm not a people pleaser at work, but that's not how that works. It's not as if your people pleasing tendency clocks off when you clock in and then clocks back in when you clock off. That's not how that works. People pleasing absolutely shows up, but it just comes from, then it's this extreme form where maybe you over deliver or you under deliver because you are denying parts of who you are, and through shame. And that's why this is a limiting mindset of how we can build safety practices, because whatever our tendencies are, whatever our projections are, insecurities, they're a part of who we are, and they come for a reason. And so instead of looking at it with, why am I like this, with curiosity, we look at it with judgment. And so those projections and insecurities that come with us, with our baggage, become really, really loud. And we don't mean it to be that loud. But because we think of it through shame, it exudes itself through shame as well. And so instead of saying, I don't have baggage when I come to work, instead maybe consider saying, you know what, why am I like this? Why do I have this baggage? And what does it mean? How does it show up? And what can I do to make sure it doesn't take this really intense grip on me and I know how to work with it instead of against it? The third one is the neutral Janet desire. If you've ever watched the show The Good Place, this is where that comes from. Janet is this AI where she's neutral. She's not extremely in any one way. She doesn't have extreme emotions. She's just a nice, pleasant, calm AI technology thing. But she is AI. She's a technology, right? If you work with people, you work with emotions. If you work with people, you work with feelings. And so when we think that we're just these robotic individuals where we show up to work and we're just consistently like this and that our emotions don't take place no matter what we're feeling inside, that's an illusion. And it also is a lot makes us label certain emotions as acceptable or unacceptable. But our emotions are indicators. And so instead of, if we look at them with they have to be classified as okay or not okay, that tells our brain that some emotions are good and other emotions are bad. When in fact, every single emotion is an indicator and they're actually power tools to help us understand how we're interpreting and feeling about a certain situation. And so oftentimes though, when we have, if someone expresses frustration, we may think that, oh, okay, they're just being difficult today. When in fact, that frustration is actually maybe needs to be vocalized better, but it has a point. And, you know, if we're angry, whatever our emotions are, they are indicators. But oftentimes, because we don't embrace them, they lead to trauma bonded teams where, and I'm sure every single one of us have been a part of them, where we work well as a team, but we mistake that trauma bonding for trust. And that's not real sustainable trust, because whatever the trigger is, maybe it's a bad manager, a frustrating client, when that gets removed, the whole team falls apart. And now you don't know how you actually interact with these folks. And now your trust feels almost fake. And it's not that the trust is fake, but it's not real trust. And so it's important to consider when it comes to our emotions, how do you deal with less pleasant emotions? And how can you use them as an indicator? And what is it trying to indicate? And then you can use that to express it with your manager, with your team, or even with yourself. Maybe it's, you know what, I am feeling angry because I'm angry with myself, in fact, or maybe I'm feeling frustrated because I don't feel heard. Whatever that indicator is, use it to your advantage. And then the last one is the us versus them dilemma. And this is a really limiting mindset that I think corporate really reinforces. Corporate is a general term, but not just corporate, but in the work environment. They really reinforce this idea that our safety is independent of others because of maybe the office politics that we see often, the pitting one against the other, the constant layoffs. When we see that constant bad news, our fear is absolutely being shaken and our safety is being questioned. And so we think it's all for me, not for anyone else. And so therefore we think our safety is independent of others. But the truth of the matter is our safety is dependent on others as well. If our team feels safe around us, then as a manager, we feel safe to know that our team's going to give us the best work, produce the results that we're hoping to get done, right? But so our safety is integrated with others. It's interdependent and integrated. And if we look at ourselves as independent individuals and we don't consider how is that person interpreting their safety, and it's just, I only care about mine, that leads to a lot of tension and unresolved conflict. And that is just a very negative cycle that keeps happening, keeps happening. And so it's really important to ask yourself, how do I communicate my needs with others? And again, I don't think, I mean, this is, everyone should know this, but especially as women, a lot of us I have noticed come to struggle with that is, how do I express I need help? Or how do I express that I feel unheard or unvalued or unappreciated? And so this is a really important thing of considering, how can I use how do my needs interact with somebody else's? And how is my safety, knowing my safety, going to work with somebody else's? And how can we make this a joint effort? Because again, it is interdependent and integrated. It's not independent. And so to kind of conclude on this slide is the limiting mindsets. These are a lot of limiting mindsets that are reinforced through, again, corporate expectations, behavior, society expectations and behavior, how events play out. But that is all the more reason why it's important for you. This is what's within your control to address what limiting mindsets am I operating from right now? What limiting mindsets are affecting how I show up and how I keep myself safe? And these are not by any means the only ones, but these are the four common ones that I see with a lot of professionals that I work with. And so taking that time to kind of dismantle these limiting mindsets is really a critical step. And I'd argue the most important and the first one to building psychological safety. Because again, if you change your behavior, but you don't know why you need to change that behavior, it's just not going to be sustainable. And so when we look at our limiting mindsets, if it's okay, well, I recognize a limiting mindset, but I don't know how to change it, the step that I would invite you to take is how can you reframe it? Not I need to eliminate this limiting mindset because that came from somewhere, and it's not that it's not important, it's just not relevant anymore. So how can you reframe it? If you operate, for example, from the self-sacrifice fire source, how can you reframe that and say, you know what, my value is inherent and my productivity is something that I'm proud of myself for, or something, or my productivity does not determine my worth. My productivity is something that I get paid to do, and I'm going to do that to the best of my ability, but that does not mean I have to set myself on fire to keep others warm. Whatever that reframe is and how it can feel most authentic to you is going to be a great way of slowly making those steps and shifting the mindset and where you operate from. So now that we've addressed limiting mindsets, we can go into the behaviors of building actual safety. What behaviors do we engage in and how can we change them? And so we'll start with the first safety pillar, which is inclusion. Inclusion safety in general, we want to foster this feeling of belonging, certainty, connection. These are things that we crave in this safety. And so again, the point is, how do we fulfill this safety need? And so lower quality might be gossiping, masking, people pleasing, right? Gossiping, I'd argue, is a really common one. And that's a tricky one, right? Because there's no denying that gossiping can kind of feel like, ooh, we're building trust, and ooh, we're included in this little clique. But then when we leave it, we leave and kind of say, oh boy, maybe I shared a little too much about myself, or oh boy, I don't agree with anything that was said. I was just agreeing with it because I wanted to feel included, right? Those are lower forms of inclusion safety that we might engage in to feel safe in the environment. But if we know what allows us to feel included, and we know what makes us feel safe in that we belong, that we are certain of our presence in the workplace, that we're connected to our peers, we will maybe shift them and say, you know what, I'm going to engage in higher quality. So I'm going to higher quality forms of safety. So that would be roundtables where everybody gets to contribute and participate, and you hear everyone's idea with interest and engagement, celebrating everybody's wins, so on and so forth, or asking all perspectives from your junior analysis to higher leadership. You look at everybody of how can I make them feel included as a person. When next pillar is learner safety. This pillar of safety, we're chasing rather confidence, novelty, growth. We want to have these feelings when we go up to work. But when we have lower quality forms of that, when we're chasing it because we're looking for somebody else to fulfill that instead of fulfilling it ourselves, we might build survival friendships. Or you may not even really like that person, or you don't agree with how they approach things necessarily, but you're just trying to survive and learn. So you're in this survival friendship together. Or maybe as a manager, you offer a figure it out approach because you're like, well, I didn't have any safety to learn. Nobody gave me the time to learn it in a slow, neutral pace. So you just better figure it out. Or the one-way learning approach, right? Those are lower quality forms of chasing what we're craving from the learner safety pillar. Higher quality forms would be a knowledge share, mentorship opportunities, multiple learning avenues. And this allows folks to actually learn to understand and give their best selves at their role. With contributor safety, we're wanting to foster significance, confidence, contribution, so on and so forth. And again, like I mentioned, contributor safety is really, really important for job satisfaction, because as you move through your career, as you become more senior in whatever role you are, this is really what's going to make your fire going at work, right? You're not learning so much, you feel more established, you know what you're doing. And so If you, however, don't feel valued enough to know what you're doing, and you feel that you constantly have to prove yourself in order to feel safe and complete in the role that you are, you might take credit for others' work. There might be hierarchy games that you play to. You might overwork to prove your worth. Whatever that might be, those are lower quality forms of safety. Higher quality forms are appreciating others' strengths and letting your team run with their strengths, facilitating cross team collaborations and idea ownership and execution. And this is really where, if you know your value and what makes you feel contributor safety wise internally, you tend to go from being this, I need to make sure my team's managed, to being a support manager and leading through example. And then challenger safety, power, importance, appreciation. Like I mentioned earlier, this is a really important stage. And the sign of a great manager is someone where your team can come back to you and say, hey, we appreciate you, but this was not, we have some feedback on this, or could we do this differently, right? Having that openness to challenge shows the depth and quality of the relationship at hand, whether it's professional, personal, doesn't matter. That is a true sign of how quality and depth it is. But if you don't feel that you can challenge, you might feel that you have to interrupt or yell just to be seen or just to be heard. Maybe you've said something over and over and it feels like no one's heard you. And so you don't know how to chase that safety. So you do it in these lower quality forms. But when you know it internally and you build those higher quality safety forms, it's asking for clarification, conflict resolution, receiving constructive feedback with grace, and listening to understand and not respond necessarily. And so when we're building these higher quality forms of safety, it's really important to first look at what are some behaviors that I might be engaging in, right? We go from limiting mindset. What behaviors does that limiting mindset currently make me do? And what are some shifts in behavior that I can make to where I will feel more internally safe? And it's not to say that it's an easy process. It does take time. But again, like I mentioned in the beginning, you really owe this to yourself, because you deserve to feel safe when you go to work, and you deserve to know what makes you bring the best version of yourself for your team. Because when it goes to tying it all together and building it for our team, the questions that are so important to ask is, when it comes to inclusion safety, for example, am I trying to fit in, or do I feel included? Because if I am trying to fit in, I'm not going to know how to create that for my team, right? So if I'm trying to fit in and I feel that you have to behave a certain way, as a manager, I might treat somebody who's different from me with harshness, or I might play favorites, or I might invest more in somebody where I don't think they're too difficult to work with, right? But if I know how I feel included as a whole, I'll look at somebody who's different than me with interest and with possibility and with appreciation for that perspective. With learner safety, am I trying to survive, or am I learning to understand? Right? If I'm learning to understand, I have that same expectation of my team. And if I'm learning to understand and I know what I need to do in order to fully understand the material, I'm much more empathetic if someone says, hey, could we have a video format of this? Or is there another resource? I learned better from that resource, right? And so the question is, how do I treat those who learn differently than me? And if I am expected to learn like that, I'm going to expect my team to learn like that. But if I take my time to learn, I will let my team take their time to learn. Contributor safety. Am I trying to prove myself and that I can do this? Or do I get to show them what I got? Do I get to show up to work and say, I know this, my team's got this, I've got this, let's go, right? That difference in that sentiment is confidence. It's just pure confidence. So how am I treating those who are ready to fly more solo? And if I know I can show up with confidence and I get to show, I know my value, I know my strengths, I know my skills, I'm way more appreciative of my team's strengths, their skills, what they can teach me even. So a lower form of that is micromanage, because we have to deliver results. A higher form of safety is support management, where I can say, y'all got this. I'm just here to facilitate the best environment that I can to ensure you do your best work, which is really our whole job as managers. We don't, our teams don't always need us to tell them what to do. They just need to know that we have their back to give them the best environment to do their work. And then the last one, challenger safety. Am I picking my battles because I just don't want to get in trouble? Or do I feel respected enough to disagree, to debate, and push back? And if my team sees that I can respectfully disagree, I can respectfully, push back, they're going to be a lot more willing to do that with me as well. And if that's because I know what challenger safety looks like for me, if I know what makes me safe to push back or how to push back, I'm going to exemplify that and show that through action. And at the end of the day, that's what a real leader does, right? We lead by action. We don't tell our teams what to do, we show them what to do. And so ensuring that they know that we're going to have their back and we're just as open to them telling us something as they are to us really facilitates that better quality relationship with our team. And so as we've tied all of this together, like I said, would really invite you to look at yourself with grace and gratitude and say, you know what, I'm so proud of myself that I'm going to try and build or explore what I need to do for myself to build more internal safety. And that leads us to three action items that you can do anytime you're having, I guess, an experience where you want to build better safety. Reflect, empathize, perceive. I always say do a rep, do a rep. So the first thing, reflect. You are an expert in your experience, so get curious about yourself. This is really essential back to the whole the limiting mindset. Reflect, where does that mindset come from? What were the experiences that contributed to that mindset? And what is something that I can use to interrupt those negative thoughts and build better behaviors? So our beliefs about ourselves, that's where we can really make the most change. Empathize. Again, our emotions are indicators. And so be empathetic towards your emotions. If you feel a certain way, say, hey, why am I feeling this way? What is making me feel unsafe about this? What can I address? Do I need to communicate something? Do I need to take accountability for something? Do I need to apologize for something? Do I need to express something? Use those emotions as indicators, and that will allow you to feel more internally safe and empathetic towards yourself, which again trickles out to others, towards others. You might be able to know how someone else might perceive a situation, which goes into the third one, which is perceive. Treat others the way you want to be treated and treat yourself the way you would want others to treat you. It's a two-way street. And so it's really important to show up when we're looking at how can we build better safety behaviors and for ourselves, and then layer that up with how might somebody else be interpreting that in terms of their safety. When we perceive ourselves with value and worth and kindness, we perceive others with value, worth, and kindness and want to work together to create an overall better and more psychologically safe environment. So that is all I have for you all today. Thank you so much for engaging in the chat. I appreciate all the kind words and listening to this presentation. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you found it insightful. Please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or check out my Gumroad for more resources. And I appreciate your time. And Luis, I will hand it back to you.
Wow, thank you so much, Poonam. That was brilliant.
Oh,
I have like so many people I want to share this presentation with right now. It is
thank you.
absolutely fantastic. I
Thank
yeah,
you all. Thank
almost
you
like
all for the kind comments.
yeah, it's really really great. I'm just wondering what the whole topic and these ideas, like what prompted you to your interest in developing this presentation?
Sure. All of you with your kind comments, first of all, thank you so much. I'm blushing. I don't know if y'all can tell, but I'm totally turning red with gratitude. To answer your question, Luis, I think it really all came from just pure observations in the workplace, and it really did come from, I guess, reflection on past work experiences and how I wanted to learn and move better. So what worked well, what didn't work well. And I think as I moved into more managerial roles, something that it all sparked with was I think a lot of managers feel unseen. They feel a lot of weight on their shoulders, I've noticed, and no one really looks at managers with that type of empathy. It's oh, managers are so hard, or they have too much control, or they're mean, or blah 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 blah. But if you talk with the manager, they're like, I am balancing 15 plates and I am just one human and I have two hands. And so what really inspired me to write this was to have managers start to look at themselves with more kindness and empathy, and to know that they are worthy of being seen. Management is such a important, and leadership is such an important critical role, and we need spectacular leaders, but our leaders need support too, and our leaders need guidance and resources too. And so I said maybe this is a start, is letting them know that they're worthy of receiving that, and how can they build it for themselves, and then maybe inspire one step at a time to have others do the same.
How long did it take for you to pull the slide deck together? I mean, it's just brilliant, the ideas and the concepts that you've managed to organize. It's really well done.
Thank you so much. It took the slide itself is it didn't. Shout out to Canva, by the way. They did all the template work, honestly. So, but the concepts and all that I've been working on for about a year, and I
Okay.
did put more of this information together on my Gumroad because there's so much information, and there is, yes, Lindsay, it is Canva. So there's so much information. So I decided to break it up in multiple chunks. But when it came to this hour-long talk, I wanted it to be practical, effective, realistic, and give the main points. That way, if folks feel inspired to want to learn more, there's more in-depth resources in the Gumroad. So it's taken all together collectively about a year.
Excellent. All right. I have that Gumroad link, just if anybody wants to take a look there. I am curious about it. Can you talk about those products at all that you have listed on Gumroad?
Sure, I can. Would it help to pull it up, or is
Sure.
okay?
Sure, you can pull it up.
All right, I will pull it up. Now y'all will see my dashboard. But so here are these psych safety products that I've put together. You will notice that they're all memes related, because I think learning should be fun and funny, and why not? We're all here to learn. So each of these resources were designed with a particular topic in mind. So they're the basics of psychological safety, which go more into that organizational, literature, but in a very bite-sized, concise, realistic way. I think a lot of the literature, it's being explored, but I wanted to do it in a more fun, not academic necessarily perspective, because I've worked in academia, and I'll tell you, sometimes the reading itself, I'm like, I want to support my professor so much, but this is brutal to read. I didn't want it to be brutal to read. So um, there's different sources on that. There's also EQ building, and that was designed for folks who want to maybe be more emotionally available for their team, but they're struggling to know how. They don't, there's that barrier for them, or they may not quite know how to read their team. There's also 2 case studies where I used Friends and Avatar: The Last Airbender to explore our baggage, the baggage free illusion that I mentioned earlier. Friends explores that, and what do we carry with ourselves into the workplace. The Avatar case study explores team dynamics and how to play to your team's strengths, because sometimes it's not that you don't want to play to them, you just don't know how, or you don't know how they can work together. That case study explores that. um, the only one that may not be super psych safety related directly is the meetings one. The meetings one, I did that because I have been in 10,000 meetings where I'm like, this could have been an email, this could have been a ping. And meetings are such a productivity killer, and I really believe that those small actions make or break our work day. I mean, I'm sure you've had a day where you had no meetings and you leave work feeling elated, and then there's a work day where you had nothing but meetings and you're like, I don't know what I did all day. I don't know where my day went. So those were kind of what sparked these different resources, and to give that more comprehensive view of the parameters of what you can use to build psychological safety.
Wow, fantastic. Love it. This is great.
Thank you.
Yeah. Poonam, thank you so much for doing this. I mean, I am definitely going to share this one out. This is brilliant.
Thank you so
Uh,
much, Lise.
uh, I learned so much in this one, and just
Thank you.
reflected a ton during the session. So thank you for that experience.
Thank you. And thank you again for giving me this opportunity. I had such a blast. And thank you all so much for the kind comments, and the spectacular feedback. I really appreciate it. And yeah.
All right, everybody. So we have another session coming up. That one's going to be at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. And that one is Sarah Syed discussing empathy, leading with empathy, how women in L&D shape inclusive learning cultures. So I think that'll be a great follow-up to this one. So please come back at that time if you're interested. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and close out the session, and hopefully we'll see everybody soon. Thanks again, Poonam.
Thank you, Luis. Thank you all. I hope you have a great rest of your day.